Hey everyone, welcome to Talking Tokens, a podcast focused on interviewing the best crypto founders, market players, and up-and-coming startups that are changing the industry every single Tuesday and Thursday. I'm Jacquelyn Melinek, your award-nominated host and former senior crypto reporter turned entrepreneur, and I'm excited to be here with you all. Now, let's get into it. Today's guest is Denelle Dixon, the CEO of Stellar Development Foundation. Stellar is an open source blockchain network that aims to create real world use cases through sectors like cross-border payments, tokenizing real assets, and more, which I'm sure we will discuss today. Without saying too much, Denelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Happy to have you. To start off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into crypto a number of years ago?
Yeah, so my route to crypto was a bit circuitous, as is my professional experience. That I started out as a trial lawyer, right out of law school. Actually, I started working, and I worked for a lot of tech companies, and so that sort of got me in the privacy space. This was a long time ago, so early days of Web 2, and actually maybe a little bit of Web 1, and so it was just really fun to be able to go through that piece. I took that and then I worked for a bunch of tech companies, and then I went into private equity because one of the clients from the firm offered me to work for him. So he was the chairman of the firm. So I did that for a while, and then I came back into tech and went to work at Mozilla, where I spent a bunch of time as the COO there working on policy and tech and the business side, which is like the triad that I love. And then Jed approached me Jed McCaleb, who's the founder of Stellar, he approached me when I was at Mozilla and asked me to come consider this. And it sort of felt like that perfect combination of tech, policy, and business. And then really looking at, in terms of, I'd spent so many years on the internet of content, and to really dive into the internet of money with the background of understanding all the things we did wrong on the Web 2 side, and try to make them right here. That's really what I loved. And so that was 5 years ago last month. So it's been really great.
Yeah. What has it been like the past 5 years? Do you have any lessons you could share with us, like what it's like internally or how the opinion has changed over that time? I can imagine when you first jumped into crypto, people in your life were probably like, what are you doing?
Well, it's so funny because I went from running a large part of Mozilla. So I had lots of people on the teams that were working with me to coming to an organization that had 12 people and that we had $12 million, I think, at the time. And the thing about it is that it has been such an incredible journey, but people were kind of like, what are you doing? But then understanding that thing that sort of drove me, which is that triad of things coming together, they got it. But then, I think 3 weeks after I started, Facebook announced, Facebook at the time, announced that it was getting into crypto, which was awesome for the industry because it really put a nice focus on us. And we really got to spend a bunch of time working on policy efforts as a result. But honestly, for me at the time, because we knew they were coming into it. We had already heard about it from them before they announced. But it was I spent all this time fighting against those 5 companies on the content side of the web, and thought that I kind of had gotten away from it here, and then they came. But at the same time, it was a blessing. So, I just it's been an incredible journey. And I think of it very much like a journey in terms of where we were. I went to DC, I think 45 days after I started, because I really believed that policy was a really important thing for us to focus on. And the knowledge and understanding of blockchain and crypto at the time was really driven by Meta and really driven by what was going on with Facebook. And so we had a real opportunity to sort of enhance those conversations. And where we were then to where we are now is, I think, just remarkable, sometimes a little sad given the pressure in the US and where we are, but just globally, the conversations are so they're so knowledgeable and interested. And so I feel like it's just been a really big story arc in terms of to bring it to the place, a bit more maturity. And I think the lessons that I'd say is that it's never done. We have so much work to do. And that's the beauty of this, because it keeps you engaged and focused. And sometimes on those days when you're just really overwhelmed by everything going on, you're like, come on, wouldn't it be nice if this were easy? But if it were, we wouldn't all be doing it.
Yeah, 100%. So you spent a lot of time in DC then. You said 45 days in, you were doing it. 5 years later, I'm sure you're still spending time there. Do you think we will get some guidelines, clarity, resolutions based on the conversations you're having out there? Or do you think it's still going to be kind of an uphill battle for the foreseeable future?
I think it's going to be hard to get it this year. I was so bullish last year that we were going to get something because the conversations were all in the right place. And then we had a bit of a hiccup. I think a little bit with the administration, not sort of seeing like the path that we could get to. Right now, I think that, I mean, quite honestly, I think that this administration is now seeing that they kind of do need to approach crypto and blockchain a bit differently and more open to it. So we'll see what happens with the passage of this recent Senate bill and see what happens. The president initially vowed to veto it, and I don't actually think that that'll happen. Mm-hmm. I don't think we're going to get the clarity that we want in the U.S. until after the election, which is a super challenging reality because it makes no sense. Some of this is low-hanging fruit and should have been done already. It's just gotten very political, and it's just a shame that blockchain is so political. You know, when the internet started way back when, it didn't become a political issue. There was some desire to regulate, but there was also this need to say, wait, let's have a hands-off approach and say, let's let this innovation flourish a bit and see what happens. It's different when you're dealing with money. And I think that's the thing that I've learned through this is when you're dealing with money and there's this focus on protection of the individual and the SMEs. When it comes to money, you have to know that going into it. And so we've engaged. This is one of the big things that I think I see a bit more maturity in the industry. I believed, based on my experience in Web 2, when we didn't really engage with regulators early on, we sort of said, we know everything, we don't need you, which was really stupid because we clearly didn't. This time I started engaging, as I said, like 45 days in the US, outside of the US, as many places as would talk to us. And I thought that the really important lesson that I had is that you need to have conversations so that there's, especially when you're dealing with money, otherwise you're going to get like really bad legislation. So I hope we get it. I don't think it'll happen until after the election.
Yeah, that's honestly what I'm hearing as well. And the conversations I'm having too, I feel like, right now leading up to it, all the focus is on the election itself. And, crypto is one part of the whole discussion, but for us, it's the whole discussion, right?
The whole discussion, yeah. For sure.
We talked about how you've been at Stellar for 5 years, and I know Stellar is almost 10 years old, I believe in July, right? That is the 10th birthday. Yep. That's a long time in crypto. Like I consider, 3+ years a long time, and 5 years and 10 years is like, that's almost the whole time of the industry. For the time you've been at Stellar, how has it changed from inception to when you joined to where we are today? Like, what is the company's evolution like?
Yeah, it's come up for me. It's come up for me a lot, like the role that Stellar plays in this industry and the fact that we are going to be celebrating our 10-year sort of birthday anniversary in July is pretty remarkable. I think that, the interesting thing about it, even from my review of all the materials and conversations with Jed from day one, so much of it hasn't changed in terms of the real focus. Jed sort of stepped into this and his view was that money should move like email. And it's so simple. And it's actually, I've come back around to that this year in really the understanding of why it doesn't make sense that there's these complications. In all of my travels around the world, when you hear how hard it is to get money onto certain continents or into certain countries, and you know that this tech stack allows it to happen, and then you think about that phrase that Jed talked about all the time, which is money should move like email, you're sort of like, it can, and it does. And we just need to be able to be comfortable with the tech stack and the tools running on top of it to make it happen. And so I think the interesting thing is that 10 years in, there's not a lot of in the direction of what Stellar is really good at and really good for. We haven't lost that focus. And so I think even though the industry in my 5 years here has gone up and down in terms of its focus, we have never lost it. Like we've always focused on that utility because that's what we believe that moves this technology to mainstream. And so we're not doing the big splashy stadium naming rights. We're not focusing on, maybe the 23% returns on the network, although maybe now on Soroban folks can do that. The real issue that we've been focused on is utility. And now with Soroban, everyday financial services. So I think that after 5 years in, it's just as clear to me today as it was on day one that we might be all racing towards the same finish line, but the way that the Stellar ecosystem is going to get there is diverged, and it looks a little bit different from our colleagues. And I think a lot of that just has to do with the fact that we've been heads down, focused on those foundational pieces, which are on and off ramps and making sure that stable assets can run really cleanly on the network, and then focusing on what people need, the tools that people need. So compliance tools and all of that. And I think, I'll just say that I spent about, 24 hours in right before my anniversary, which was on May 1st, really going back over everything from like my first day in. Mm-hmm. And I looked at like the strategic initiatives that we started way back then. And really what we focused on was really to be the network, to support the network that people can know and trust. And that's regulators, that's individuals, that's businesses. And really to focus on what brings this technology to life, which is those mainstream use cases. And so I think that the one thing that I think is very different today than was 5 years ago is having those global on and off ramps with MoneyGram, and then having the local on and off ramps with the players that we have worked with in each of the regions to make that happen. And that is pretty big and remarkable, and didn't get the attention that we really thought it should get at the time. Right. But it's okay, because it's going to be able to make this technology sing, and it already is. So, thinking about 13 billion operations on the network since its inception, that's a pretty remarkable thing. We're now having 1 billion of operations every month. So if you look at those things, you can see the growth of this ecosystem and the growth of what we've built.
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm glad you brought up Soroban too, because we'll talk about that in a second. But kind of to the point that you were saying that Jed was saying money should move like email. It makes so much sense. It's so catchy. And I agree, sending money should not be difficult, yet it still is. You know what I mean? So why are we still at this point where, maybe banks or regulators or any institution outside of crypto does not see the value the way people who understand this technology does? What is it going to take to get money to move like email?
Well, I think that's a great question. And I've spent so much time thinking about this. And I think that so much of our attention is placed in the US because that's where a lot of us sit. Right. And in the US, the tech stack is not as monumental as it is outside of the US. And so we focus a lot on making sure that we have the regulatory frameworks here, because that's where so many folks are based. And frankly, that's where a lot of people that use this technology in order to, people with access already to the global financial infrastructure are using this tech stack to enhance their access to different tools and to frankly make more money. And so that's kind of our attention that's focused here. But I want to, before we came on, we were talking about, I just got back from a trip to Ghana last night. And I went to Ghana because we had been speaking with the Bank of Ghana, who has a pilot program. One of the things that we saw on an earlier trip this year to Ghana is that to get money into the country is just impossible, because the bank, unless you have a bank account outside of Ghana in the US or even in the UK or in Europe, and even if you do, then it's still really hard to bring money on. And that is where money should move like email. And that is where it's really important. And I'll just say that the Bank of Ghana sees that. And they are so excited about working with us to be able to make this happen. They have a regulatory sandbox. They're really, really focused on bringing the right conditions. You have to, we're working with a local licensed entity to be able to make the flows reality. We already have it with MoneyGram, but I'll say that, walking into a bank, which is what you have to do when you pick up the cash from MoneyGram, is not always the most friendly, but there are local providers there that you can walk up to their ZPay, you can walk up to a booth and just get cash out. And that's a super easy place to be able to make that happen. So meeting people where they are. So I'll say that in the US, it's really hard to see the path forward. Outside the US, I see just tremendous movement and interest and support. And so that's the thing that makes me excited. It's the thing that really it moves me, I'll just say. And it makes me when I'm in Ghana and when I'm talking to local Ghanaians about the challenges they have, and then I'm oh, this is amazing. This works. And then we show them how it works, and we move the money like email onto the continent. And then they're like, wow, like this changes my life. That is where I think we're going to see a lot of movement. And we already are.
Right. So for Stellar, you guys look at the payment industry maybe outside of the US more so. Like, where do you see the most value in the near term? Is it like countries where they genuinely need this rail, like on-ramp, off-ramp kind of service?
Yeah, I think that blockchain is an additional rail sort of anywhere. And I wish we all just sort of talked about it and thought about it like that way instead of something so unique. And because I think Swift in the early days was probably just as, not as game changing, but just as like complicated to get people's arms around. And so I think it's just another rail in the US and maybe even in Western Europe, it's just another rail. But in countries that really have really bifurcated, broken financial infrastructure or infrastructure that doesn't meet well with the global financial infrastructure, because Swift and maybe every other payment methodology doesn't work as well there, that is where this technology sings. And that's on the African continent. We went across the continent to many different countries and we saw the same things in Latin America and South America. Just amazing opportunities. And really the growth that we're seeing on the network is really happening in the global South. And so for us, our mission at the foundation is to create equitable access to the global financial system. It's not to make people, and I'm just going to say this it's not to make people in the US richer than they already are. It's to make it so that people who don't have access or who have limited access have access to something and tools that they could then use to be able to improve their life or to feel some sort of independence from where they were, and some respect for these things that they didn't have. And so everyday financial services should be available to everyone. And so that's kind of where we focus.
Mm-hmm. There's also a bigger discussion in the industry about tokenization of assets within financial institutions. I know you've been a part of those conversations as well. What do you think will happen there? Is that something that you see prominent in the US, Europe, Asian markets, or is it?
Yeah, mm-hmm. I think it's prominent everywhere, even in those markets where you wouldn't expect it to be. I think it's really important and prominent. I think, and this is the reason why I think it's really crucial for us to be engaged here. There are two things. First of all, having financial institutions like Franklin Templeton, like Wisdom Tree, build assets on Stellar. Franklin Templeton's money market fund is already I think at 400 million or close there too. Wisdom Tree just issued bonds in 41 states in the United States. This is all really important because it makes the network stronger and more trustworthy when players like that participate.
Right.
And the second thing is, I think these type of assets are going to rival stablecoins domestically and in Western Europe, meaning that they're going to be able to be used for payment methodologies as well. And so they're going to be licensed, regulated assets like digitized bank account, digitized, your bank balances. Those are all going to be able to be leveraged for payments. And I think that just makes the networks stronger. And it really helps on the banking side for those banks that use it. It helps them to be able to have really accurate ledgers. And, immutable records are great things to have against fraud and money mismanagement. So these are all things that are beneficial on the institutional side as well. So I love that they're doing this. I think tokenized assets are amazing. We've always believed stablecoins are the way to move money, and having tokenized assets that are going to bring, hopefully, we already just saw movement on Franklin Templeton. They originally issued Benji and you had to just essentially hold the asset in your wallet. Now you can send it to people, send it to your peers. That just happened, I think, 2 weeks ago. This is movement. This is exactly the kind of thing that you want to see happen.
Yeah, 100%. Looking at the growth of decentralized finance, specifically on Stellar, how do you kind of expect that to evolve and stand out in this space where, there's a lot of DeFi applications and people building in it? What types of applications are you hoping to see evolve on that network?
That's such a great question. I think that, it's one of the things when you do, I love the fact that there's so much activity on Ethereum. I love the other networks that have a lot of attention in this space already. One of the areas that sort of sets Soroban apart is that we're actually looking for those institutions, those businesses that really want to focus on delivering everyday financial services to those who don't have it. So we already are seeing really cool DeFi protocols like Blend and Cables and Phoenix and SourceSwap already on Stellar, on Soroban, growing every day, remarkable rates. It's fun to see them. They keep posting 7 days in, we're already $1 million, or 5 days in, we're at, so it's cool to see that because it's just come onto the network. And so it's really fun to see that kind of growth. And these are ways that you get this is why this year we've said that's the year of everyday financial services, because then you have lending, borrowing, credit, you have debt, you have all these opportunities to bring that out to lots of humans in the world that may not have had access to it before. And now you can. And so Soroban is a place that I think is unique because it is really focused on that utility. And we want all players to come and build. And I also think what's really been fun to listen to is the folks that are building in Soroban, and then we hear them talk about like their experience working with this ecosystem, and they're really excited about the collaboration and the opportunity and the growth, and to be a part of something early days that they can really influence and change. So I think that this is it's awesome. We're seeing new features and innovation happening like every day. And that's the reason why we built Soroban, or we supported with the ecosystem to build, because, if you asked us 4 years ago, we would have told you don't need smart contracts on Stellar because, you can do everything you want with multi-sig and with other operations. And really what we missed, I'd say, and we came late to the party, but we're a lot more fun, I think, is how we think about it, because we missed the opportunity to have these developers come and really have greenfield space to grow in.
It's not always about who's first to the party. It's about like who actually brings the party and gets it going. So I could get behind that. And for context for our listeners, Soroban is the smart contracts platform on Stellar that launched on the network's mainnet in March, I believe, right? And it's essentially to enable developers to build, deploy, interact, etc., with Stellar-based dApps. And the foundation also shared it was allocating $100 million to projects leveraging Soroban. What types of projects does the foundation want to fund, support, etc.? What are you really hoping to get here?
So you need the whole thing, and we already have it. So what we did is we sort of mapped out what a minimum viable ecosystem looked like before Soroban went live. And we made sure that there was not only one participant for each of those requirements, but also we had duplication of efforts under all of them. So everything that you need in a smart contract platform, you need those DeFi protocols, you need DAOs, you need oracles, you need indexers. And of those, I think, all the DeFi protocols are always the most exciting because there's so much innovation that can happen there, but they need all of the other players to sort of come to it to make it work. And so right now with the adoption fund, we've already awarded $3.2 million worth of XLM last quarter alone to builders across the Stellar network and from the Stellar Community Fund. It's just really fun to see what's happening with respect to it. And it's, I got to say that before, there wasn't the greenfield space for Stellar on Stellar for all these developers to build, and to see what they're building and how quickly they're building, and then how quickly they're gaining traction. It's been really fun. So we fund projects across the board that are being built to bring those, what we call the everyday financial services, sort of to life.
Okay. On that front, about the ones you funded so far, can you kind of tell us what those projects entail? What about them made them interesting to you guys?
Yeah, I think that in terms of the oracles and the DAOs, what's important about them is that we really needed that sort of context for folks to be able to build the assets there. And honestly, a lot of it goes to the Stellar Community Fund. So we put the money out there, and then we let the community vote on which projects should actually sort of come to life. And we are now having SCF, Stellar Community Fund, voting on I think it's bi-monthly basis. So it's happening all the time so that we can give out more and more of this, the fund for Soroban out. So while we might look at it and we try to find things that are particularly interesting, it's honestly the community that comes together to do it. Now we also we have grants that we'll fund from outside of that as well. And so what we're going to look at there is we're going to look at, have they thought about compliance? We have an audit bank that we've actually put together. So we supported auditors to come to the network, and then we actually have paid them to be able to, audit the protocols of others. And so people can be a part of the audit bank and come in and take advantage of the auditing, which we think is really important. We're really trying to build in this security mindset as you approach these things that are so important to do well. So those are the kinds of fun opportunities that we see. But we want to see people who are building things that are really delivering that value, but are also thinking about strategically, are we doing the compliance pieces we need to do? Are we thinking about the security pieces that we need to think about? And how are we then going to connect up with the rest of the ecosystem? So the community fund looks at it, and then we take a look at some of it too.
Interesting. So that means you guys have a lot of trust in the community then.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing. The community's hasn't served us wrong at all. We have a really vibrant community that we've been doing the Stellar Community Fund for quite a while now, for many, many years. And it's been so interesting to see what the community selects in terms of, the entities they want to support. And while the grants aren't huge on the community fund, it's like a really nice way to get folks started. Then they can come and they can ask for other grants, because everything's published on our page as to what kind of grants you can ask for. But it's really fun to see it.
Yeah, I want to talk to you a little bit about community, because I feel like so many new projects, they're like, oh, we want a community, we want to scale so fast, we want the world's biggest ecosystem. But it's like, a lot of times, if you want a good community, you should be intentional about how you're building it. Does that make sense? Because you don't want to just gather everyone and anyone, and then, the trust is in their hands to delegate, funds or whatever it may be, or build out the ecosystem. But then if they're bad actors, et cetera, that's the reality of like a vanity metric opposed to like quality ecosystem. So when it comes to Stellar's community, how do you kind of intentionally build that and engage people to join and get it to where it is today and like where you want to see it in the future?
Yeah, I think that's you just sort of hit it on the head. When I was at Mozilla, we had this huge ecosystem and community, and it was not monolithic. People joined the Mozilla the community for different reasons. It was a big enough brand, a big enough mission that they could all figure out their own reason to join, and which was amazing. But then it was really hard to be able to feed the community, because sometimes we didn't know exactly, because it was so large and because everybody had sort of their own vision of it. It was really hard to be able to say, like, what does the community want? There really were like hundreds of communities as part of Mozilla's. That taught me something. When we thought about our ecosystem and our community here, we all needed to have needed to have a vision as to where we were headed. And that's really important. I want to say not everyone needs to share in the mission of the foundation, because we have a mission-oriented view of the world.
Right.
They could be completely business-minded and they just want to make money. That's great. So long as their product and the services are delivering value into this ecosystem, they should have that view. So it's not about them believing in the mission of the foundation. It's about them recognizing that they want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And so you do have to be deliberate in terms of the things you deliver into the ecosystem. What we don't like to see is people sort of who are grant shopping across different communities to see like who will give them the largest grant. One of the things we always say is, you tell us why you think Stellar fits. It's my very first question to people who want a large grant or they want to be a part of it. And I'll say, okay, well, did you look at the code? If you looked at what Stellar offers, tell me why you think it makes it work. You don't always have to come at it with that, but it makes it, when people understand the value that what Stellar and the network and that larger ecosystem can bring, they're a better participant in the community. So It can still be a diverse community. It can still it doesn't have to be monolithic, but we want everyone to sort of recognize the value that we're doing something amazing together. So vanity numbers suck and they don't tell you anything, because it's very short-lived. And you can still keep growing those numbers, but to no avail. You want a dedicated ecosystem that is in it for the long term. And that's what we sort of try to grow.
Mm-hmm. How would you define Stellar's community?
I think Stellar's community is about utility. And I think that they have really early days, they've always really focused on the things they can do on the network that are valuable to them and ultimately valuable to their consumers or their businesses, the SMEs. And so I think it really is utility driven, which makes it really nice, because that's, of course, connected deeply to our mission. And so I think that's how I would define it. Folks really want to see the game changing activity that this network can bring to the world. They want to see it happen, and they're desperate to see it happen. And that's why it's so nice to have them as a part of what we're doing.
Yeah, no, I love that. I feel like utility is always like the number one thing that people should at least strive for. But then sometimes people are just like, oh, fun internet money, and they don't even see like any purpose beyond like a meme coin. But hey, you're allowed to have fun in this industry too. When it comes to the idea of real world applications, obviously we've seen them evolve over time. Some have been substituted in and out, while others have emerged pretty successfully. What are the utilities on that front that you think are the most promising for real world applications today and maybe in the future?
Yeah. So I just want to comment once first on the meme coin thing. I think it's really true that people need to have fun. And I think it's really true that people need to see it. And I think one of the hardest things is staying focused because there's all these shiny objects that you can look at and you're like, oh, but we could be doing that. And it's sometimes it's been like trying really hard to pull people back in and to say, it's okay. We're not doing all of those things right now. Let's focus on what we need to do. And then let's get to the utility components. And then, also we can have fun along the way. But the shiny objects don't last very long, as we know. I think from my perspective, the most promising real world applications are those that are just, like I said about Ghana, like delivering value onto the continent, into the country simplistically. And really, I think that it's like paying gig workers. It's making sure that like payroll opportunities are available. It is this notion of being able to raise money to do a Kickstarter equivalent from a global landscape simply and easily. So leveraging smart contracts to be able to do that without even knowing that you're leveraging smart contracts, right? So the wallet should make it so simple that you're just doing this thing and you don't have to understand. You can, but you don't have to understand what happens on the other side of it. So I think it's just really these financial services that we sort of take for granted where we are. It is the ability to hold assets to potentially hedge against inflation. We saw this a lot in Argentina. Right now, the Argentinian currency is pretty stable. And so that use is not really highlighted at the moment. It's been 2 months since that we've seen the stability of it. But who knows what's going to happen after, right? Like we'll see what happens with Melee and the work that he's doing. But that's a really important use case in lots of parts of the world. And so I think that it really is the simple things that are going to be the most dramatic for the billions of people all over the world.
Yeah. And I feel like going to a point you made before is that accessibility of these things are so important. Like I don't really need to know how it works on the back end. I'm not a developer. Just let me press my buttons and get the access to this utility that you talked about.
Yep.
Yeah, 100%. All right, Denelle, I want to move into a segment we call Jack in a Hat. And basically, I have a bunch of questions in here, and you can tell me when to stop, and you're going to answer them, hopefully.
Okay.
Ready? Right.
Okay. Okay, stop.
Oh, okay, this one. Oh, okay. Who's your role model?
Oh, man, my father. My dad he was an electrician, so he wasn't in the traditional like financial space. He wasn't in like the business side, but he was just an amazing guy. He took me aside when I was really young. I was the first person to go to college in my family. And he said to me, even if you spend like 2 days on the college campus, Denelle, you've done more than anybody in our extended family. And that's amazing work. And he did that throughout my whole time. Even when I went to law school, he's like, you just have to like do what's good for you. And I think that he like the fact that he entered the world every day with like this smile on his face and like this way to say, he'd always say, wake up in the morning and find the 3 reasons why you should be happy today. Just these like simple things that I carry with me through my life. He's alive still, but he had a couple strokes. And so he's not like the same person, but like the things that I learned from him and have carried through my life to my boys, it's been pretty remarkable. And also in business and understanding that relationships are the most important thing. Relationships from a business standpoint, from a personal standpoint, but the way that you get respect, you gain respect, you give respect, all those things are so important. And that's how business should get done too.
No, I 100% agree with that. Your dad sounds like a really great person. And I bet he's proud of you. CEO, lawyer, all these different careers. I mean, forget the first day on college. You were out there. All right. Next one. Tell me when.
Okay, stop.
All right. What's no longer cool to you in crypto?
Well, I would say that this whole 23% return game that we did a long time ago, like I think just a long time ago, like a year ago, that's super no longer cool to me. It feels like people should always understand that if it's too good, if it feels too good to be true, it is too good to be true. And I think it's not cool that this it took a really it took a bite out of our success and of success of this whole industry when so much of it was the gamification of money. And so I think now it's really nice. We were pushing everybody on utility for so long, and we tried to stay focused on utility even through like the crazy times, tried to put our blinders on and stay there. And I think now I love that everyone's like back to the game and really like focusing down on like what really makes sense for this tech stack.
Right. No more high yields. You don't think we'll get any more of those?
I think high yields are good, but when you're at 23, 30, 40% returns.
Right. Yeah. It's like, where's it coming from? Haha. Yeah. That's always the question. All right. Last one.
Okay. Stop.
All right. What's a lesson you've learned while building out the business at Stellar? Or working in crypto is the more general question.
I think that even though we build in this world that we want to be a trustless world, that I think it is, I think that trust in a trustless world is really important. And no matter how much we try to build an ecosystem and an industry and a tech stack that's built in a trustless environment, because we all want that, because we don't want to have to rely on businesses and companies. We want this system to sort of take care of itself. To make it and to sort of jumpstart the ecosystem, trust is still such an important thing. And even at the application layer and at the dApp layer, users are going to want to, like, people don't want to use things that they don't ultimately trust, especially when you're dealing with money. So I think as much as we try to jump away from the trust thing, it comes back to us all of the time at the use level. And so I think that that's why we always talk about it as trust in a trustless environment. So the environment itself can be trustless, the tech stack can be trustless, but those applications on top of it can't be. And also, like, to the next sort of layer on that, trust, as everybody has said, I used to, when I was in Web 2 world, I used to always talk about trust being the currency. Because we would say that, on privacy issues, if people, you can gain trust pretty quickly, but you lose it instantaneously. And once you do, it's really hard for your business to continue. And so that's why transparency and open source, and like your code being open, you being very available to your users is really important. And so I think that all carries through to Web3, even if we don't want it to.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. And even for me, like looking at applications or even websites or anything on that front, or a business, like if I don't feel like I could trust it, there's no way I'm going to engage with it, especially when money's involved, like you said.
Well, and the money thing, like I think we sort of lost sight of the fact in the early days that when it comes to money, sort of everyone cares in a way that maybe the world didn't care as much on the web too. But I'll tell you that way back when, when people wouldn't put their credit card information into a website because they were fearful of what would happen, they didn't understand that HTTPS was going to come in and like even be more helpful from a security standpoint from them. What they got comfortable with was the UX and the UI design. And so I think that's a learning for us too, that so much of it is about the comfort that people feel with the tools that we give them and not the tech stack, because they're going to hope the tech stack works.
Right.
What they care about is like the engagement that they're going to have in this UX design. And so I love when I first started here, maybe a year into it, I would say, oh my gosh, we need all of those UX and UI designers from Web 2 to come over to this side of the world so that we can actually get them to make our products better. And so now I feel like we have it, and this is like a really great place for us to be moving forward from.
Yeah, 100%. I have two last questions for you that I ask all my guests. One is, what else are you watching right now that you think people should be paying attention to outside of the conversation we had throughout this podcast?
Well, I'm really watching all the regulation that's happening with AI and what people are focused on with respect to AI. And I think that, the data sources and the underlying data sources fit for AI. I really wish everyone would pay attention there. I think AI is such a remarkable invention and so important for us to be able to leverage it in all of our work. I think that what I get fearful of is much like the web. There are people in lots of, even in the United States, who don't have access to the tech stack of the web as much and as easily as they should. And I fear that AI is going to become like another layer of like keeping people out of things. And so I would really love people to focus on the access requirements. Already you see that some organizations are charging for the right to use some of the AI tools, and they should be able to, but that's a barrier to keep people out. And I fear that it just sort of creates more of a divide in the world than we need. So I would love for people to focus on that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that front, especially when it's a conversation of like for-profit versus nonprofit organizations, et cetera. You know what I'm talking about when I say that.
I do. And it's one of the things that's so interesting because I look at Mozilla and they're sort of now bridging into AI. We need a player like that to be like sort of the independent player. And I don't want to call them a watchdog for the industry. I don't think we ever liked that term necessarily, but I do think having an independent come in and sort of help to make sure that these things are not forgotten, that we need to play in the right space, make sure the data sets are non-discriminatory, and then also make sure that there's access for everyone.
Yeah, 100%. My last question is if you could leave our listeners with a piece of advice.
I will say that I'm not going to even pretend that I am so worthy to be able to give others advice, but I'll say that the most important advice that I learned way back when I started my career was about honesty and making sure that when you approached every situation, you did it in the most transparent way, because that builds that trust. And so for me, it's always been like, I could be in the most high-powered negotiation with you, and I want X, Y, and Z on my side. But I'm never going to misrepresent. I'm never going to lie. I'm never going to tell you a story that's not true. I'm going to be really honest about it. I'm going to be aggressive, and I'm going to want to win because that's who I am. But I'm not going to do it in a way that is going to make you or me feel like we're in a bad situation. And so I think honesty is like the best in business and your personal life too, of course. And I think that sort of the way that I grew up and the way that my dad and my mom sort of instilled that in me, it's one of the things that I want my boys to be able to take on and just know that, sometimes you're going to get it wrong, but as long as you're honest about it, then people are going to respect it.
No, I agree with that 100%, especially with my career up until this point as a journalist. Like I've always been honest with my sources, with everyone. Like if it was on record, off record, I always tried to be a good person and tell the truth and be truthful with them and their story. And I think
sometimes that gets lost. Like, I think that it makes it so that people do trust you. And I think sometimes people don't appreciate how important that is. And so I think the more people like us, the better for the world. So we need to keep pushing people out there. And there are so many people that care about it in the same way. And then unfortunately, there are those that don't. And then we see all this harm to our industry when people out there that don't. And you probably know who I'm talking about. Yeah. So it's a good thing to remind ourselves about.
100%. Now, thank you so much for coming on today. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. I loved it.